It's Viny deWonderful transmission with your host, Viny deWonderful.
Hello, and welcome back to another Viny deWonderful transmission. Last time I talked about AI art and a short introduction. It was really, I should have called that episode 0. Kind of like first time recording, first time presenting. But this time I'm going to talk about traditional medium. Traditional medium is a term in the art world for everything that is not made in the computer. Don't get me wrong, digital art is amazing. I love me some digital art and all the possibilities of computer, be it pixel art, 3D renderings, everything is like great. As far as art is concerned, especially visual art, everything is awesome. But the medium that I work most with is traditional. So this is the topic of today's transmission. If you are unfamiliar, there is this distinction, right? Digital, meaning computer. If you draw in a tablet, nowadays, when we talk about tablet, people think of the oversized cell phone computer type of tablet. But for a while there, in the early 2000s, there were those plastic tablets we still use today. So if you draw, you probably know what I'm talking about. For digital drawings, there is that type of drawing, and then there's traditional. And very old term for traditional is plastic arts. That is the term that used to be used when I started studying. Plastic not meaning, plastic as in the substance, but as in an adjective meaning stuff that you can mold and create stuff out of. Nowadays, plastic arts, mostly people think of sculpture and that type of visual art. It's not really used for painting and drawing much nowadays, but it used to be the term. And so they changed plastic arts for visual arts because we have stuff like photography. And photography, when it uses film, it's not really plastic art because you're not really molding anything with your hands, but it's also not digital, again, if you have film. But it is art and it is visual. So visual art is the current all-encompassing term for any type of art that you can see. We use plastic for sculpture and traditional for what I'm about to enumerate now. The most famous ones, two of which I don't use, and I will say why, and then the others. The main one, like the granddaddy, the grandmother of all painting styles, is oil. Oil painting is one of the oldest. It's one of the most reliable ones, and you can do a lot of great stuff with oil. Oil painting is the pigment mixed with as the name suggests, with some type of oil. And of all the wet mediums oil is no good to me because, well, you have to use solvent. And even if you can find a solvent that doesn't smell bad, it's still very toxic. And, me in my little room, I mean, we all know what happened to Van Gogh, smelling all that toxic stuff in his little room, not eating well. So I don't want to repeat that recipe. Oil, what makes oil great is that it takes a lot of time to dry. It actually takes several days for the oil painting to dry at touch, let alone to fully dry, which gives you the opportunity to change stuff, to remodel, to rethink. So it's a pretty great medium, but it's still quite toxic to me. I am the type of guy who likes to hold the brush in his mouth from time to time. This is not good habit for artists. Please don't do that. I try to be conscious of that, but it happens. And if I were to paint with oil, I would be drowning in that toxic fume. So it's no good. Then we have the acrylics. Now, acrylics are pretty cool. The one problem, actually two problems that I have with acrylics is one that opposed to oil, it dries really, really fast, especially if you live in a place that is kind of hot weather. Acrylics will dry up real fast. It's okay because you can paint over it, like you can layer a lot without losing much quality. But because it dries so fast, and the fact that I am a little bit absent-minded on occasion, which a lot of artists are, you can really lose brush after brush. They will dry up and there is no solvent to clean a brush that's been ruined by acrylics, I don't think. Sure, you could remove the paint, but you're also going to destroy the brush. So that is no good. So those two, I think, are pretty brilliant, oil and acrylics, but I don't use them as much because of those reasons. There is also, now of the ones that I use, to start off, the one that is also gracious, also amazing, and we all have experience with. It's good old pencil. Now, we're all familiar with the HB pencil, the number 2 pencil as it's sometimes called, but you can also buy a pencil that is a little bit more soft, like 2B, 4B, 6B, and so forth. I usually like my lead being like 2B and up. So even if you get like cheap printer paper and you get like a half decent eraser and soft pencil, you're good to go. So, drawing with pencils. I know a lot of people out there are drawing on their computer tablets and stuff. On occasion, I beg you, if you don't have it at home, with pocket money, get some paper, get some pencils, and get doodling. Even if you're not an artist, I don't care. Just do, for good old Viny sakes, do some drawing with pencils, because it's a cheap and underrated, underappreciated thing. Then we have inking, which is the bread and butter of mangaka artists and comic book artists, and it's such an incredible and elegant thing. I love inking. I probably could and should and will make an episode talking all about inking. The black ink. Now we're back on wet mediums. Mind you, there are a lot of traditional mediums that I'm not going to have time to talk about. But of the wet mediums, ink is interesting because it's water soluble. Like acrylics, you don't have like to use solvents. And ink, you have water resistance and non-water resistance. So you have inks that after it dries up, you can add other layers or watercolor and it stays there. And then you have the inks that aren't water resistant, and you can create all types of special effects. And it's actually a nice introduction to watercolor. I more or less went into that path. Ink is sometimes called China ink. It's sometimes called Indian ink. And it's sometimes called Nankin, which in the past China had two capitals, Peking, which is now Beijing, and Nanking, I think was like capital of North and capital of the South. And so when Europeans started importing from the ink from the Indies, it got all of those names like China ink, Indian ink. But a good old black ink for the cartoonist, for the comic book artist, for the illustrator, it's one of the greatest tool. I have amazing admiration for the fact that good artists can create shading and shadows and texture by using the hatching effect, like line after line and cross hatching, and you create texture, you create water and vapor and like if you don't appreciate how line work in ink works, try to draw something that is not solid, like water, like gas, like a cloud. So my jaw always drops when I see like a Silver Age comic book artist or an illustrator from the beginning of the past century, because they do that stuff with pen and ink so well that I geek out. I mean it's just too incredible. And I need to mention, of course, Gustave Doré, but it's worth mentioning that he actually worked with prints. And prints is yet another type of traditional medium. It's kind of like doing a stamp. He would draw on a plaque of copper and then print that, hence the name printing. He would print that on paper. You can do that with wood, with stone, with copper plates. So it's a whole different field of traditional art. And that's about it. I could and I probably will talk some more about inking because I love it so much. But I didn't even have time to talk about watercolor and gouache and colored pencils and whatever. So that will probably be next time. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for listening to this transmission, and I see you next time.